Hi everyone, my name's Adristea. This is another kitbashing video. Let's get right into it. I hope you guys like crossover episodes because for this episode I am taking one of my favorite 40k characters, Fulgrim the Phoenician, and bringing him into Age of Sigmar. To do this, we're going to be basing him off of the Sigvald Prince of Slaanesh model. This model has been used to make many a Fulgrim kitbash, but I've never seen it in quite this way. I start by building the Sigvald model as normal, except I immediately realize I have to get rid of all of his emblems of Slaanesh, including the one right on his chest. I cut that off and file it down. The lore for this kitbash is based off of a fanfic that I started writing and will be reading excerpts of throughout the video. Darkness. Fulgrim hadn't experienced darkness since the demon blade fully consumed him. The warp was a constant barrage of colors and lights, the blurry image of the world through his eyes etched into his soul. They hadn't been his eyes for a long time. Quiet. Fulgrim hadn't experienced quiet since entering the warp. Screams, cackles, and sobbing assaulted him to no end, and his own voice mocking those he slew seared his soul. It hadn't been his voice for a long time. Peace. Fulgrim hadn't felt peace since he struck down his brother. Pain of all kinds tortured him every moment, and the regenerating wounds his body suffered were echoed tenfold onto his soul. It hadn't been his body for a long time. The little upturned nubs on his shoes and filed them down. Next, we're going to his weaponry. Basing this off the Fulgrim Transfigured model from Horus Heresy, I decided to give him a spear and a sword. For the spear, I sourced it from Andrasta. Before I could connect the spear to his body, I had to make sure it would fit between his big flowing cloak. To do this, I cut the cloak out of the sprue, cleaned up any mold lines or sprue tabs. Next came the process of removing the Slaaneshi symbols from the cape. This was a slow and careful process as I had to make sure not to mess up the organic flow of the cape, while still keeping it nice and smooth. Before attaching the cape, I realized I needed to do the greatest sin of all, cover Sigvald's assless chaps. Despite it being Fulgrim, it did not make sense for a Stormcast, in my opinion, to have his ass out. To do so, I mixed up some green stuff and milliput, commonly known as Milla stuff or Gorilla Put stuff, and used that to sculpt. Now Fulgrim felt true void. There were no lights, no sound, no pain. Perhaps this was death. Fulgrim hoped it was. He hoped this was the end of all his suffering. The divine ecstasy he was promised was a lie, a mask for the twisted stimulation of life. Pleasure was a facade. Fulgrim's senses returned one at a time. Cool air caressed his flesh. He flinched before realizing it was not painful. The latest tickle of wind used to ravage him with pain and pleasure, but now it was simply pleasant. His body pressed into the soft earth below him. Then his sense of smell returned. It was pleasant, earthy, hints of petrichor and fungus. Hearing was next. Birds sang, bugs buzzed, and a beast skittered through the brush. Finally, his sight returned. The ground was carpeted with rich green ferns, grasses, and bushes. Trees taller than towers shadowed the sky. Thick leaves dappled a bright light across the wood's floor. I took advantage of pinning to connect Andrasta's arm and spear to Sigvald's much skinnier arm and spear. I will later use more sculpting to bulk it out. This is when I made my first mistake, which I will get into later in the video. I cut these shoulder pads off the arms of the Skaventide Liberators, including a Liberator Champion, to get a cool lion design. I intend for this Stormcast Fulcrum to be a lord-celestant, and thus he should have a decorative pauldron. For those who don't know Age of Sigmar lore, the Lexicanum article for lord-celestant reads as follows. Lord-celestants are Stormcast Eternals, each one a commander of a chamber of their storm hosts inspiring their fellows into war. These paragons of order are towering warriors clad in glistening Sigmarite, whose faces are hidden behind a scowling mask. They didn't fit on their own, so I used a little bit of Milla stuff to help space them against the arm. As you might be able to tell, there's a little bit of trouble adhering the Milla stuff to the pieces of plastic. That's because green stuff and Milliput, like most two-part epoxies, are not actually adhesives like you'd be led to believe. Instead, they can only be used for sculpting or filling gaps. Fulgrim stared at his own nude body. For the first time in millennia, it felt like his own. He willed his hand to move, and it followed his command. Pressing it down to the soft earth, he pushed himself to his feet. Feet. He no longer possessed a serpent's tail. His hands felt his head. No horns, and no wings on his back either. His hands. He only had 2 of them. He was himself again. The demon was exorcised, his apotheosis reversed. Because Sigvald's left arm is pre-sculpted in his body, I have to clip it off before I can attach the Lord Veritan's arm from the Scaventide set to it to give Fulgrim his flaming sword. Before connecting the sword arm, I extend the arm with a little Milla stuff to help balance it out. This is a friendly reminder that if you like these videos, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on this video so that I can keep making them and know what I should do next / how to improve. I also use some more Milla stuff to bulk up each arm's bicep, so that it better fits the proportions of a Stormcast and of the forearms. Once dry, I bring a file to the Milla stuff, which is one of the benefits of using a Milliput mix rather than pure green stuff, to help carve out the shapes of cloth and armor. I spent some time deciding what helmet I want to put on his belt. While of course Fulgrim would have his head out, and it would be a shame not to use Sigvald's luscious hair for this sculpt, I still wanted him to have a Stormcast helmet. The one I eventually decided on, I am pretty sure is from the Vindictors from the Dominion box set, but I could be wrong. It was in my bulk pile. Now this is when that mistake I mentioned earlier comes in. I did not check if the head would fit over the pauldrons, and it did not. So after preparing and cleaning up the head, removing all its horns and attaching it as normal, I used a little bit of Milliput to help bulk up that neck and make the head go over the pauldrons. Fear of making it look too bulky or bad though, I had to very carefully sculpt it into extended neck and chest muscles to make it look like he's almost too big for the armor, which I think helped plays into the Primarch scale. I connect one of Sigvald's chains that goes on his waist to his head. To differentiate him more from Sigvald, I decide not to use the pre-sculpted base, and instead make my own out of foam. "This cannot be," Fulgrim said, his voice silky, no longer damaged by the rasp of demonic shrieking. "My father must have freed me. I must return to Terra." He stood to his full height, yet he did not tower above the shrubbery as he was used to. The plants on this planet were wild and massive. Fulgrim had experienced such environments before, but he hadn't truly appreciated them since before the Crusade. He took his first tentative steps through the brush. His legs wobbled like when he was a toddler. No amount of inhuman muscle could make up for thousands of years without experience. The art was all but lost to him. After covering the hill in Vallejo dark earth, I run over it with some clay shaping tools to smooth it out because I want it to look like wet mud and not like rocky dirt. Now I sculpt the aforementioned neck muscles. I use green stuff for this so it has a more biological appearance, whereas milliput or Milla stuff is better for sharp angles like armor. To make it look like he has a headpiece, be it a tiara or a wreath, on his head, I thought this would 1. Cover the bumps left from the missing horns, and 2. Accentuate his regality by adding some more gold to his head. I also sculpted some extra hair around it to help it blend in. Last, some cleanup. I wanted to give him a more Stormcast style gorget, so I sculpt with some milliput extra armor protecting the throat, especially since more of it is shown. To help bring in that this is Fulgrim from the 40k universe and not Sigvald turned into a Stormcast, I bring over a purity seal from an old Space Marines kit I have. It is not weird for a Stormcast to have writing on it. I thought it would be a nice touch if Fulgrim specifically requested that his armor have a purity seal to honor his father. Now, all I need to do is base and paint him up, and we look at the final results. Lightning struck. A chorus of birds sang from somewhere unknown. The smell of lavender flooded the battlefield. A radiance brighter than Hish blinded all who watched. The figure stood above all around him. Golden armor of pure Sigmarite glimmered in his own brilliance. Royal purples flowed in ethereal wind behind him, joining with his silver hair. A grin crossed his gorgeous face, piercing purple eyes locking with his enemies. Sigvald stared down the newcomer. How dare he? How dare he be so beautiful? How dare he be so egotistic? How dare he not grovel in comparison to my perfection? Pride flooded Fulgrim with each thunder-emitting step, all enemies but his twisted mirror cowering. He held his spear and sword to his side, unafraid of incoming attacks, and then he roared. I chose to make Fulgrim a member of the Lions of Sigmar Stormhost for a few reasons. Their bright gold armor and purple cloth really fit the Emperor's Children vibe I was going for with Fulgrim. The lore also lined up. Very little is known about the Lions of Sigmar except for their thunderous roar in battle, and that they are mostly from a city called Phoenicium. Because of this, I thought the parallels to Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children were too good to pass up, as well as the lack of established lore allowed me more creativity in the story. There's also a few other references and puns there, like a pride of lions and Fulgrim's pride, that I will, of course, be making fun of. If you are wondering, I painted Fulgrim nearly entirely on stream on twitch.tv/adristea. Please come in and watch. I love to hang out with you guys, and it's a lot more wholesome than it seems. If to you, wholesome is sex jokes. Thank you so much for watching. Please give a like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate all of you. And yeah, I am so excited for the projects to come, and I hope you are too.